I grew up in the city, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, and I'll tell you right now, I am not someone who gets spooked easily. I'm a nurse. I've worked overnight shifts in the ER. I've seen things that should haunt a person, and mostly they don't, because I know how to separate feeling from function. So when my aunt passed and left me her property, 14 acres of farmland in a small rural county in southern Illinois, I wasn't scared. I was inconvenienced. The plan was simple. I'd spend 2 weeks out there that October, sort through her belongings, list the property with a realtor, and be back in my apartment before Halloween. My friend Dana offered to come with me, but she had a kid and a job, and I told her I was fine. I'd stayed at the farmhouse before as a kid. I knew the layout. I wasn't worried. My aunt had been living alone out there for the last 6 years of her life. She was sharp until the end. Drove herself to her appointments, kept a garden, had no complaints. The house was old but solid. Original hardwood floors, a wood-burning stove, and a porch that looked out over a flat, open stretch of land that ran all the way to a tree line about half a mile out. The nearest neighbor was about 2 miles up the county road. There was no cell service at the house itself. You had to drive to the grain elevator parking lot in town to get a signal. I knew this. I was prepared. I had books and a radio and my aunt's record player. The first 3 days were completely uneventful, peaceful even. I sorted through her closets and her kitchen and her papers. I found her old recipe box and cried a little, and then I made her chili recipe for dinner and felt better. The nights were quiet in a way city nights aren't. No traffic, no sirens, just wind and the occasional sound of something moving in the field. Deer, I assumed. There were deer all over that part of the state. On the 4th night, I woke up at 1:17 a.m. I know because I looked at the clock on the nightstand, one of those old plug-in digital ones with red numbers. I wasn't sure what had woken me. I lay there for a minute listening. Nothing. Then I heard it again, a soft, rhythmic sound coming from outside, somewhere past the porch, like something dragging across dry ground. Slow, steady, deliberate. I got up and looked out the bedroom window. The moon was almost full, and the field was bright enough to see. Nothing there, just stubble from the fall harvest. My aunt had been renting the acreage to a neighboring farmer for years, and the flat, open ground rolling out toward the tree line. I stood there for a minute, saw nothing, and went back to bed. Probably an animal. Probably a coyote dragging something. That's what I told myself. I slept fine after that. The next evening, around 5:30, I was on the porch with a cup of coffee watching the light change when I noticed a figure at the far edge of the field, near the tree line, just standing there. I didn't have binoculars, so I couldn't make out any detail, just a shape, the size of a person, standing still. I watched for maybe 5 minutes. It didn't move. I figured it was the farmer who leased the land, maybe checking on something. I went inside to make dinner and forgot about it. That night I woke up again at 2:44 a.m. The dragging sound was back, but closer and slower, like it was just below the porch. I lay there longer this time, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, just listening. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, walking slowly along the side of the house, moving from the front porch around toward the back. I'll be honest, I was scared at that point. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't, but I'm also a rational person. So I got up, turned on every light I could reach without going near a window, and stood in the kitchen holding the flashlight I'd been using for the basement, which is a ridiculous thing to hold, but it was heavy, and it was what I grabbed. I stood there and I listened, and after about 4 minutes, the footsteps stopped. I waited another 10 minutes. Nothing. I should have left that night. I know that. I've thought about it 100 times since, but it was almost 3 a.m. And the nearest motel was 40 minutes away, and I want to be honest about this, I had convinced myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a large dog. Sound carries strangely in flat, open country. I know that now. I didn't give it enough credit then. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. When it got light enough to see, around 6:15, I went outside and walked the perimeter of the house. The ground on the south side, the side the footsteps had seemed to move toward, was soft from a rain we'd had 2 days before. There were tracks in it, not animal tracks, boot prints, heavy, large, deep set, leading up from the field along the south wall of the house, and then And this is the part that still bothers me. Stopping. Just stopping about 4 feet from the back door. No prints leading away. Just a pair of prints facing the door, deep in the mud, like whoever made them had just stood there. Looking at the door, I drove to the grain elevator and called the county sheriff's department from the parking lot. They sent a deputy out within the hour. He was a decent guy named Tom, middle-aged, practical, not dismissive. He looked at the prints and agreed they were from a large work boot and that they were recent. He walked the field perimeter with me. He found where the prints came from. A set of tracks leading out of the tree line, crossing the field, ending at the house. He did not find any tracks leading back into the trees. He said it was probably a transient who had turned back when they saw the lights come on inside. He said the area had had some issues with people camping illegally in the tree lines. It was state-adjacent land out there. He took a report, told me to keep my doors locked, and said he'd have a patrol car drive the county road a couple of times overnight. I packed that afternoon. I want to be clear. I didn't run. I packed my things in an organized manner. I covered my aunt's furniture. I locked every window and door, and then I left. But here is the thing that I still think about. When I was doing one last walkthrough of the house before I left, I went through the kitchen. And on the kitchen windowsill, the one that faces the south side of the house, there was a small pile of dirt. Dark, clumped dirt. Like soil from the field, just sitting there on the inside of the windowsill. That window had been closed and locked the entire time I was there. I had checked it myself on the first day. The property sold 6 months later. I've never been back. I told the realtor it was in great condition and to handle everything by email. She did. The new owners have been there 2 years now, and as far as I know, everything has been fine. I hope it has been. I genuinely do. But I think about that dirt on the windowsill more than I'd like to admit. My dad's family has had land in Western Tennessee for 4 generations. It's not much to look at. 80 acres of woods, a pond, a creek, and a small hunting cabin that my grandfather built in the early 60s. We go out there a few times a year, deer season, mostly. It's a kind of place I've known my whole life, and I'll tell you right now, I'm not a person who believes in ghost stories or monsters or any of that. I'm an electrician. I deal in things I can touch, test, and trace. You tell me something's wrong, and I'll find the wire that's causing it. My cousin Brett and I had been planning a trip out to the property for the last week of November, just the 2 of us. His usual crew had backed out last minute, and I'd had some vacation time to burn. We drove out on a Sunday evening, got the cabin warm, ate sandwiches, and went to bed early so we could be in the stands before sunrise. Standard trip. The cabin sits about a 1/4 mile off the county road at the end of a dirt lane. There's a heavy iron gate at the road, the kind on a chain with a padlock, and then you drive through the woods to get to the clearing where the cabin is. My family has had that gate for 30 years. There's never been a reason to think much about it. We woke up at 4:45 Monday morning and drove down the lane to the road. Brett unlocked the gate. We drove through. He locked it behind us, and we went to town for coffee. Normal morning. We got back to the cabin by 9:30 after a quiet morning in the stands. That's when I noticed the gate at the road was open. I didn't mention it to Brett right away. I figured maybe he'd left it unlocked and the wind had pushed it. It wasn't alarming, just unusual. I mentioned it when we were back at the cabin, and he looked at me like I was confused and said he'd locked it. I said maybe he hadn't gotten the hasp all the way on. He said he'd checked it twice. We agreed to just keep an eye on it and moved on. That night I woke up at 3:09 a.m. There was a sound outside the cabin, a low, repetitive sound I couldn't place. Not a voice, not footsteps, more like a scraping, dragging rhythm, like something being slowly pulled across the wooden steps of the cabin porch. It went on for maybe 30 seconds and then stopped. I lay there and listened. Brett was asleep in the other bunk. I didn't want to wake him over a sound that was probably a raccoon or a possum. I've dealt with animals on that property my whole life. I told myself that's what it was, and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, this is where I made a mistake, and I know it. Brett wanted to do an evening hunt, and I agreed. We should have checked the perimeter of the cabin before we left. We didn't. We went out to our stands around 3:30 and stayed until dark. When we came back to the cabin at 6:45, I could see from 50 yards out that the front door was open. Not broken, just open, swinging slightly in the cold. Brett and I looked at each other. I want to be clear about how we handled this. We did not go inside immediately. We had our rifles and we were not stupid. We stood outside for a few minutes, made some noise, announced ourselves. No response from inside. We went in together. The cabin was empty. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been thrown around or broken. But things had been moved. The two chairs at the small kitchen table had been shifted and were facing each other, like two people had been sitting across from one another. Brett's water bottle was on the floor instead of on the counter where he'd left it. And on the windowsill, above the bunk where I'd been sleeping, there was a small pile of 3 smooth creek stones, side by side, arranged deliberately. Neither of us had put those there. We called the county sheriff that night from Brett's cell. The service out there is barely a bar, but it was enough. A deputy came out the next morning. He took a report. He walked the property. He found footprints along the tree line at the back of the clearing. 2 sets, he thought, maybe more, moving around the cabin. He found where they came from and where they went back into the trees. He said it looked like 2 or 3 people had been moving around the cabin and possibly watching it from the trees. He asked if we had any idea who it might be. We didn't. He told us it was probably trespassers, maybe people camping on adjacent land, looking to steal hunting equipment or supplies. He told us to lock the cabin doors when we were in the stands. He said it more than once. He seemed to have seen this kind of thing before. We left that afternoon. We didn't finish the week. Here's what bothers me. The gate at the road was still locked when we drove out. I checked it personally. The chain was on, the padlock was closed, there was no damage to the gate or the fence posts. Whoever had been on that property had gotten in and out without coming through the gate. And the fence runs the whole perimeter of the property. My grandfather put it up himself. I've been an electrician for 16 years. I'm good at tracing problems back to their source. This one I never traced. I don't know who it was or how they got in or what they wanted. The stones on the windowsill were the part I couldn't make fit into any rational explanation I was comfortable with. Someone arranged those deliberately. Someone stood over my bunk while I was sleeping and put those stones on the sill above my head. We still go out to the property. My dad would never sell it, and honestly, neither would I. But we go in a bigger group now, and we lock the cabin every time we leave it. And I check the perimeter of the cabin first thing every morning, before coffee, before anything else. I haven't found anything since. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse. I want to start by saying I've lived on a working horse property in rural Virginia for almost 20 years. My wife, Rachel, and I raise quarter horses. We board a few, breed a couple a year, run a small operation. I know that land. I know those animals. I know what's normal and what isn't, and I am not someone who imagines things. This happened in late September 2 years ago. Rachel was visiting her sister in North Carolina for a long weekend. Our farmhand, a guy named Marcus who'd been with us 7 years, had the days off. It was just me managing the property, feeding, turnout, checking the fence lines. Routine. The horses were acting strange before anything else happened. I noticed it on the first evening around 6:30 when I was doing evening feed. Our gelding Max, a big, calm, 14-year-old horse who's been through thunderstorms and gunshots and a barn fire without losing his mind, was standing at the back corner of his stall, facing the wall. Just standing there, not eating, not looking around. Every horse in that barn was pushed to the back of their stall, facing away from the exterior wall on the east side. Horses do weird things, I know that, but this was all 6 of them at the same time, all oriented the same direction, away from the east wall. I walked the east side of the barn from outside. Nothing there. The fence line was fine, no predator sign. It was getting dark and I checked with a flashlight. Just the barn wall, the paddock, the fence, and then the tree line about 200 yards out. Nothing I could see. I went inside, made dinner, watched some television, and went to bed. I wrote it off. I woke up at 2:32 a.m. to the sound of the horses. Not a distress call, not screaming or crashing around panic, something more sustained and low. Several of them vocalizing at the same time in a way I don't usually hear at night. I got up, put on boots and a jacket, and went to the barn with a flashlight and my .357, which I carry on the property at night when Rachel's not here. Habit. The horses were all awake and agitated. Max was sweating slightly, which I've never seen in a horse that hasn't been worked. They settled somewhat when I was in the barn with them, talking to them, moving through the stalls. I checked everything, no sign of intrusion, no snake, no predator smell, no breach in the stall doors. I walked the perimeter again. Nothing. I stood out there for about 20 minutes. It was clear and cold, and the field and the tree line were visible in the moonlight. I didn't see anything. The horses had quieted down. I went back inside and told myself it was probably a coyote they'd smelled that had moved on. I was wrong to stay. I know that now. I should have called Marcus to come back early, or called a neighbor to come check the place with me. Instead, I rationalized it because I've spent 20 years on this property and I know what it is, and I didn't want to be the person who called someone at 3 a.m. over nervous horses. The next night at 11:58 p.m., the horses started again. Same sound, same sustained low vocalization from the whole barn. I was ready this time. I'd barely slept, and I was out the door in under 2 minutes with the flashlight and the gun. I swept the barn again, all agitated, all awake, all facing away from the east wall. I went outside and I swept the east paddock and the fence line. And that's when my flashlight caught it. There was a figure standing at the tree line, 200 yards out, standing completely still, facing the barn. I could not make out any features at that distance and in that light, but it was the shape of a person. Upright. Still. Just standing there. I shouted. I said something like, "Who's there? This is private property." The figure didn't move. I shouted again. Nothing. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, trying to decide what to do, and then I went back inside and called the county sheriff. I want to be clear that I am a calm person. I had the gun in my hand, but I did not walk out to the tree line in the dark by myself to confront someone I couldn't identify. That was the right call. I know some people would have gone. I didn't. The deputy arrived in about 25 minutes. We went out to the tree line together. The figure was gone, but the deputy found where it had been standing, a matted area in the tall grass at the wood's edge, like someone had been there for a long time. And he found footprints leading into the trees. He followed them a short distance and then lost the trail. He also found, along the east fence line of the paddock, a section of fence that had been tampered with. 3 fence staples had been pulled from the post, loosening the wire. It wasn't enough to break the fence, but if you came back the next night and pulled 2 or 3 more staples, you could get a section of fence down. He photographed all of it and took a report. We never found out who it was. The sheriff's department came back twice over the following week and drove the county road at intervals, but there was nothing. No one was found in the tree line. No camp, no vehicle, no identification of anyone. Marcus came back early and we checked every inch of the fence and reinforced the east side. The horses were fine after that first week. Max went back to normal within a few days, but he still occasionally stops and stares at the east tree line in the evenings, just for a moment, before moving on. Horses don't forget things easily. I've learned to trust what they're paying attention to. I still don't know what that person wanted. The fence being tampered with is the part that tells me it wasn't someone who just wandered onto the property by accident. Someone was out there for a reason. Someone was watching the barn, learning the layout, and starting to come in. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't been home that weekend. Rachel knows the full story. We put up additional fencing, got a security light on the east side of the barn, and we don't leave the property unattended anymore for more than a few hours. It's changed how we operate. It's changed how I feel standing out there in the dark. The tree line looks the same as it always did. That's the strangest part. It's just trees. It always was. But now at night, when it's quiet and the horses go still, I look out there before I look anywhere else.